This is our Socrates project by JKintzing and MBaetz.
To start with some background, Socrates never wrote anything down, so much of what we know about his teachings is through his disciple Plato. So to begin, before we give our arguments, we must first explain the different characters and their roles in the trial. First, we have Socrates, who is the type of outcast in Athenian society. Imagine stinky, shoeless, he looks like a mess. He went around arguing with people over basic concepts, and because of this, people got irritated with him and his roundabout arguments. This is what got him into trouble. Next, we have MBaetz, who is the man who brought up the charges against Socrates. We don't know much about him, but Socrates describes him as young and unknown in Euthyphro. Throughout the trial, he is quite short with his responses and sticks to his accusations. Lastly, we have Crito, who is a wealthy farm owner in Athens and a friend of Socrates. In Plato's dialogue, we see that he was more than willing to use his money to help Socrates escape. So, what was the whole trial? The story can be explained through two of Plato's dialogues, the Apology and Crito. In the Apology, Socrates is brought on the charges of corrupting the youth of Athens and for not acknowledging the gods. He argues his case here, and this is when Socrates reveals the Oracle of Delphi story, when he tells the jury about the oracle statement that there is none wiser than Socrates. After questioning many men who were renowned for their accomplishments and wisdom on certain subjects, Socrates comes to the conclusion that he is the wisest due to his full understanding of nothing and his continuous curiosity. Despite his best efforts, Socrates is found guilty and sentenced to death. In Crito, Socrates is visited by his friend while awaiting his execution in prison. Crito attempts to persuade Socrates that he should escape and save his life, even offering to help. Socrates, however, explains why he must remain in prison and accept death. This is where social contract theory is introduced.
Socrates' arguments in Crito can be boiled down into a main logical progression which serves as the basis for the social contract argument. It goes as follows. Socrates has agreed to abide by the laws. To refuse to abide by the laws after such an agreement is to break an agreement. It is not right to break an agreement. If Socrates chooses to escape, he breaks an agreement. Socrates ought not escape, for it is wrong. Socrates ought to drink the hemlock instead of escaping. With that, we resolve that, after considering the premises laid out by Socrates, the only proper outcome is for him to drink the hemlock. We'll prove this through the following arguments. In the first argument, that Socrates has agreed to abide by the laws. In his debate with Crito, Socrates argues that he previously consented to be governed and judged by the laws of Athens. Socrates had no problems with other Athenian laws. By living in the city peaceably his whole life, he had in effect agreed to subject himself to the laws. In Plato's Crito, it is said that, "But if any of you stays here after he has observed the way we judge lawsuits and the other ways in which we manage the city, then we say that he has agreed with us by his actions to do whatever we command." Throughout his life, Socrates witnessed the government of Athens. If he were dissatisfied or preferred the laws of some other land, he could have simply left his home state. However, he chose to stay and therefore agreed upon doing what the government commands.
In Simmons' book Moral Principles and Political Obligations, he argues that this may not be the case, in that any state obligation of a citizen relies solely upon their actions. Consent has to be given knowingly, intentionally, and voluntarily, and there must also be a chance to dissent at a known moment. Using his arguments, it can be claimed that Socrates' ruling of drinking the hemlock could be an unreasonable action, and therefore his agreement to abide by the law is not valid. Socrates would therefore not be obligated to accept the ruling of the trial, because he never gave his consent to be ruled by the laws in the first place.
In contrast to the counter, the argument of gratitude must also be acknowledged. The state benefits one and gives necessities that otherwise they would not have. The state is a benefactor, for they provide infrastructure, an education system, a health system, defense, the ability for one's parents to get married, and judgment when it is due. Socrates' act of remaining in Athens for the duration of his life shows that he is grateful for the state's contributions and has adopted it as his own. His will to die versus be exiled shows not only his respect for the city, but also his pride for being an Athenian citizen. Therefore, Socrates has agreed to abide by the laws and has exemplified this through his actions.
In our second argument, if Socrates chooses to escape, he is breaking an agreement. By agreeing to go to trial, Socrates agreed to accept the outcome. As this is Socrates' conclusion in Crito, there are numerous times in which he argues just that. For example, Socrates points out that if he were to avoid the law and escape, he would be excessively breaking an agreement that he has consented to through his actions. Secondly, in Socrates' theoretical dialogue with the laws of Athens, he argues again that he should stand by whatever judgments the city rendered, regardless of whether or not he personally agrees with them. And finally, in response to Crito's urges to flee, Socrates points out that he has lent himself over to the hands of the law, and therefore any wrongdoing on his part would only justify the conviction. If Socrates were to escape, he would be breaking his agreement with the state because he has agreed to abide by the laws. Breaking the law would be breaking his agreement.
To counter, we can once again bring in Simon's argument and suggest that the ruling was too extreme of a punishment for the act that Socrates was convicted of. Execution could be seen as unjust and unreasonable for a man with such influence. What about his family, his followers, his friends? Crito even suggests that Socrates flee the decision and continue to live for the sake of those around him. For a man who has never been in trouble with the law, who is known for high morals, and who has a family and followers, the ruling of drinking hemlock is offensive to the fair man.
If Socrates truly believed that the trial was unjust and therefore invalid, if Socrates did not want to accept the possibility of his being found guilty, he could have attempted an escape earlier and never sat before the jury. However, the fact that Socrates agreed to go to court and to argue his case proves that he was ready to accept whatever their decision would be. In Plato's Apology, we can look at Socrates' closing defense statement, which proves that he is agreeing to accept their verdict. He says, quote, "I turn it over to you and to the God to judge me in whatever way will be best for me and for yourselves."
In conclusion, Socrates would not have gone to trial if he wasn't ready to accept the worst. He believed that the jury would make the right decision, therefore the final remark of execution was one of which was deserved. On another note, this execution is not unconscionable, for it is a moral judgment made by the Athenians. Socrates has made the conscious decision to adopt it as his own and respect it, which is demonstrated through his actions. Citizens hold a responsibility to their society, even if it is during a moment of controversy and consequence. Therefore, Socrates was right in his decision to support the outcome of the trial and drink the hemlock.